She thought cybersecurity was about firewalls and passwords. She never imagined the real breach would be her heart. Samantha Lee was the kind of woman who believed in structure. Her desk at the logistics firm in Phoenix was meticulously organized, paperclips in a labeled tin. Highlighters lined up by warmth of color. She had been working there for 6 years. Reliable, efficient, friendly but never indulgent, a ghost in the hallways to those who didn't know her, but a quiet anchor to those who did. At home, she shared a quiet life with Brian, her husband of 7 years. Brian was a man of schedules and steel. Quite literally, he worked as a civil engineer, specializing in bridge design. His conversations were often rooted in measurements, stress loads, and contracts. Samantha used to find his steadiness soothing. But lately, she felt like she was living with a shadow who only talked in blueprints. They didn't fight, they didn't even disagree, but they had grown eerily quiet. It started with printer errors. Samantha's desktop froze every time she tried to access a database. IT sent Kevin Torres, a recent hire, 30, maybe. He wore simple polos, had kind eyes, and carried himself like someone who didn't need to be the center of attention to own the room. He fixed her issue in minutes. Didn't explain the fix too much, just enough to let her feel smart without making her feel inadequate. She smiled more that day. He made a comment about the framed photo on her desk, her and Brian. At a waterfall somewhere in Oregon. Kevin said it looked peaceful. Not everything is, she replied before she could stop herself. He didn't press, just nodded, like he understood. After that, it was small things. He offered to help when her spreadsheet crashed. She started requesting him specifically, claiming she didn't want to explain everything to someone new. He made her laugh. She started keeping a second pair of heels under her desk, just in case she stayed late. At home, Brian noticed she checked her phone more but rarely replied to texts in front of him. She said it was work. He believed her, or at least, wanted to. They stopped kissing goodnight. It wasn't a decision, just a series of moments that slipped through the cracks. Samantha claimed she was tired, had a headache, or needed to check on a project. Brian never questioned her. He thought love was about respect. And respect meant space. One evening, Brian was trying to print out a set of bridge calculations. But his own printer jammed. Samantha was in the shower. He grabbed her laptop, opened it, clicked on her email to send the file to himself. And there it was. Subject: still thinking about last night. You looked amazing. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. His hands trembled as he closed the screen. He put the laptop back exactly as he found it. When Samantha stepped out of the shower, towel around her waist, humming softly, he smiled and said, "Everything okay at work?" She nodded. "Just busy." Brian nodded too, as if that one word answered more than she realized. And somewhere inside him, a door began to creak open, the kind that once opened never truly closes again. Samantha never saw it. She was too busy watching her own firewalls fail. It began with a thank you email. Samantha had stayed late, and Kevin had helped her recover a corrupted presentation minutes before a major logistics review. Her message was formal, but Kevin's reply, "Happy to be your IT hero anytime," ended with a smiley face. It was juvenile, but she smiled. She didn't tell Brian. From there, they shared lunch once, just two colleagues grabbing sandwiches between meetings. But they laughed, really laughed. Kevin listened, tilted his head when she spoke. His compliments came easily, disarming her, validating her, drawing her further toward him like a tide that didn't announce itself until it swallowed your feet. They started emailing more, at first about work, then about movies, then about things they wouldn't say out loud in a crowded room. Samantha knew the company monitored email. That added to the thrill. She used words that left just enough to the imagination. Kevin, in return, made her feel like she was the only woman in the office. No. The only woman who mattered. One Thursday, after a long day troubleshooting a systems crash, Kevin suggested a drink. Just one. He said, "You look like you need to exhale." She said yes. She didn't plan to drink that much. Didn't plan to follow him into the elevator. Didn't plan to watch the door close behind them in a hotel 3 blocks from her office. That night, Samantha felt seen, desired, beautiful, something Brian hadn't said in months. As she lay beside Kevin, her mind whispered, "You are still wanted." The next morning, guilt was an ache in her spine. But by the time she reached her office, Kevin had already sent her a message. "Last night. Best mistake I've ever made." They kept talking. The texts became bolder. One afternoon, she sent a photo, nothing explicit, just enough to tease. He responded with something sharper. "Bet you wouldn't dare send more." She did. Eventually, the photos became nudes. Kevin asked for them, asked nicely. She obliged. It was dangerous, but he promised, "Just for me. Never anyone else." But things changed. Kevin's tone began to shift. He would reference the photos in unrelated chats. "Imagine if this spreadsheet leaked. Like that photo of yours." His smile in the hallway was still charming. But his messages left her uneasy. Samantha tried to brush it off. They were close. He was joking. Right. Then one morning, just past 10 a.m., during a meeting about vendor rates, Melissa from sales walked in late, holding her phone like it had burned her. "Samantha," she said carefully, "I think you need to see this." She handed over the phone. It showed a Slack thread. A leaked photo. Unmistakably Samantha, wearing nothing but a necklace she still wore that day. A caption underneath read, "Guess who forgot to encrypt their love life?" The room froze. Her boss stared at her. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Her hands trembled. She ran, out of the conference room, out of the building, and somewhere in that chaos, Kevin's desk was already cleared. Brian didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He didn't even breathe heavily. He simply sat in the bedroom's muted light, eyes fixed on the email attachment from an anonymous address. The subject line had been vague. "Thought you should know." The contents were anything but. Samantha, nude, her face clearly visible, her body captured in a moment of trust and vulnerability, a trust that had now been weaponized. He stared at the image for a long time. He could feel the anger coiled tightly inside his chest. Not fiery but cold, the kind of anger that didn't roar, it calculated. Behind that image was a story, a series of choices, and Brian didn't need to see them play out to understand where it had all gone wrong. The absence of honesty had always been louder than any confession. He didn't confront her. He didn't wake her up. Instead, he packed a duffel bag. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of pants, his toothbrush, 1 photo, their wedding. Sunlit and smiling, he paused for a moment before slipping it into the bag, unsure if it was an act of mourning or closure. And then, as the first light broke over Phoenix, he walked out. The front door closed softly. Finally, like the ending to a story that no longer needed to be told. Samantha didn't realize he was gone until the next morning. His side of the bed was cold. The closet door left slightly ajar. A silence more pronounced than usual. At the office, something was off. The usual bustle was there. Emails. Coffee mugs. The click of keyboards. But it dulled as she passed by. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. One coworker gave her a glance that lingered a second too long. Another turned to the wall as if pretending to read a memo. She tried to shake it off. Maybe it was in her head. Maybe they were just distracted. Then her login failed. 3 times. Her inbox, locked. Her desk phone, dead tone. No explanation, no warning, just walls closing in. She headed for IT. Pulse pounding. Kevin sat in his corner desk, as calm and collected as always. Like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just set fire to her life. "You did this," she said, her voice raw. Kevin looked up, his eyes infuriatingly blank. "Did what?" "Don't play games. The photos, the emails, you leaked them." He leaned back in his chair, stretching slightly, as if this was a conversation about weather forecasts. "You sent him to me. I didn't hack anything. You clicked send. You posed. You trusted me." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She felt like she might explode. "I trusted you. Why would you do this to me?" He shrugged. "Because I could. The cruelty in those words wasn't in their volume, it was in the indifference. It wasn't rage, it was apathy. Her breath caught, her vision blurred. She turned and walked away, her heels echoing across the tiled floor like funeral bells. By the time she reached her car, her phone buzzed. Notification: legal documents filed. Brian had filed for divorce. She didn't open the email. She didn't need to. One line in the subject preview was enough: violation of trust. Back at home, alone, utterly alone, she wandered through the rooms like a ghost of herself. Everything looked familiar, but it all felt like it belonged to someone else. On the fridge were the magnets from their honeymoon. In the drawer, the anniversary cards still sat untouched. Every surface whispered betrayal, not of Brian, not of vows, but of herself. She sank to the floor of the kitchen, knees pulled up to her chest. The woman who had once carried herself with such confidence at weekly meetings was now reduced to shivering in silence. Afraid of her own reflection, she thought about calling someone, her sister, her college friend in Denver, anyone, but her fingers hovered over the screen. What would she say? How could she explain this? More importantly, who would believe she hadn't known it would end this way? The emails, the photos, the late nights, they had felt like an escape. Kevin had felt like someone who saw her, someone who made her feel alive. But it had all been smoke and mirrors. A cruel game played by someone who knew just how to dismantle a woman craving validation. She wasn't angry, she was hollow. When the tears finally came, they weren't loud, they weren't dramatic. They slipped quietly down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead against the cold kitchen floor. She had thought cybersecurity meant guarding data and information. She had never imagined she'd need it for her heart. The termination email arrived with clinical coldness. No meeting, no warning, no human voice to soften the final blow. Just a sterile subject line: final notice, termination of employment. Samantha stared at it, unmoving. Her coffee had gone cold in her hand. Forgotten the moment the message appeared. There was a numb ringing in her ears. A sensation like free fall. She read the body of the email again and again. But the words seemed to slide off her like water. Breach of internal conduct policy. Distribution of explicit material through company channels. Detrimental impact on workplace morale. No questions. No compassion. No chance for explanation. Meanwhile, Kevin remained untouched. There was no mention of him in any formal memo. He had been quietly moved to another department, facilities integration, and people whispered that someone higher up was protecting him. But no one asked questions. No one demanded justice. He was free to sip his coffee, joke with his new team, and walk the halls as if nothing had happened. Samantha, however, had become a ghost in her own city. Her attempts to rebuild started with optimism. She refreshed her resume, updated her LinkedIn, and began reaching out to contacts. But replies never came. The silence felt curated, deliberate. Then, out of desperation, she Googled herself. The results made her stomach twist. Headlines from local gossip blogs, anonymous forums, even reaction threads on Reddit. Her name had become synonymous with humiliation. One headline stood out: Phoenix admin scandal, how one email ruined everything. The articles didn't care about nuance. They didn't ask for her side of the story. They had screenshots. They had threads of speculation. They had comment sections filled with mockery. Why would you send those at work? One comment read, classic case of playing with fire. Bet she thought she was special. Said another. She slammed her laptop shut. Tears burning her eyes. Her breathing jagged. It wasn't just her job that was gone. It was her reputation. Her identity. Her friends, or people she thought were friends, stopped texting. Her gym partner canceled their sessions indefinitely. When she reached out to a few old coworkers, their replies were curt, evasive. The subtext was clear. We can't be associated with this. One night, she received a message from a former classmate she hadn't spoken to in years. It read, "Saw your name trending. Hope you're okay." She didn't answer. Weeks passed. Her therapist encouraged journaling and community support. Samantha tried. She opened her journal every night. Some entries were long, raw, bleeding with emotion. Others were only a single line. Like the one she wrote the night after her third rejected job interview. I used to believe I could fix things. Now I just wish I could disappear. She slept with the TV on. Not out of interest, but because silence had become unbearable. The shadows in her apartment stretched longer now. Time warped. Daylight felt hostile. Night offered no peace. She'd lost weight, skipped meals, forgot them. Sleep came in 2-hour bursts. Her doctor prescribed mild sedatives. She filled the bottle, lined the pills in her palm, and counted them once before putting them away. It wasn't a plan, yet. But the thought of escape lingered in her mind like a low hum. The final blow came not from another article, but a letter. Her neighborhood association, once friendly, once filled with women who waved as she watered plants, had sent a formal notice. Following recent publicity surrounding your name, we believe it's best for you to refrain from attending future events. She sat on the porch for hours after reading it, not crying, not thinking, just watching the street, hoping someone might pass by and smile. No one did. That night, she wrote, I thought the leak was digital, but it broke something deeper, something no patch can fix. She thought about Brian often, about the way he used to pour her coffee before leaving for work. The way he would tap her shoulder twice when walking past, a silent, affectionate habit. It had stopped months before the affair began, but she never noticed until it was too late. She drafted a message to him, something simple. Something that didn't ask for forgiveness but acknowledged the wreckage. I miss who I was when we were us. She never sent it. Instead, she saved it to a folder labeled unsent, alongside several other letters. Apologies, and one short recording of her crying in the dark. The file was titled, Monday. On Sunday, she drove an hour north and parked by a lake she'd visited once as a teenager. It was still, silvered by early morning mist. She stood by the water's edge for a long time, clutching a thermos of coffee she didn't drink. The world didn't end, the lake didn't offer redemption, but in that silence, she heard herself breathe again, heard the sound of something inside her, not healed, not whole, but alive. She returned home that evening, unpacked the groceries, fed the cat, brushed her teeth, went to bed. No nightmares that night, just sleep. And the smallest thought, fragile, barely formed, maybe survival was a kind of victory. 2. The name on her new ID read Sarah Nolan. It wasn't a name she chose because it meant anything. It was the one that came up on a name generator she clicked through at 3 a.m. on a sleepless night. Somewhere between heartbreak and resignation. But when the new card arrived in the mail, she stared at it for a long time. It looked clean, unmarked, like maybe, just maybe, she could be that person. A woman with no history, no scandal. Samantha, or Sarah, now, lived in a town so small it didn't show up on most national weather apps. A speck of humanity wrapped around a lake in rural Utah. The kind of place where people asked you about the weather, not your past. She rented a studio cabin behind an old gas station and took a job at the roadside cafe, pouring coffee for truckers and weekend fishermen. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't even comfortable, but it was quiet, and for the first time in months, her name wasn't whispered in disgust. At night, she would sit on the wooden porch outside the cabin, listening to the wind whip through the pine trees, sometimes with a mug of tea, sometimes with nothing but the sound of her own breath. There were still bad nights, days when a certain tone in a customer's voice, or the flicker of a phone screen, sent her spiraling, when she'd excuse herself, lock the cafe bathroom, and sit on the floor until her pulse slowed. But she always came back out. The hardest part wasn't starting over. It was forgiving herself. She hadn't spoken to Brian in almost 2 years. There had been no angry emails, no closure, just a forwarded invitation that made its way to the last shared address they'd lived in, a wedding invitation, embossed in silver and cream. Brian was getting remarried. The bride's name was Ashley. Samantha stared at the invitation for a long time, then folded it back into its envelope and slid it into the back of a drawer. She wasn't angry, not anymore, just hollow. He had found peace. She had found anonymity. That was their balance now. And Kevin, she hadn't thought of him in weeks. Not until his name popped up in a news article shared by a customer at the cafe. She almost dropped the tray she was carrying. Former IT specialist charged in workplace data abuse scandal. A new company, a new victim. This time, the evidence was irrefutable. Screenshots, logs, messages. The article said he'd been placed on administrative leave, pending investigation, but the tone was different this time. He wasn't protected. He wasn't invisible. He was exposed. Samantha read every line twice. Then she folded the article and burned it in a tin can behind the cafe. She didn't feel triumphant, only tired. That night, she received an email, no subject line. The sender was a name she recognized, a coworker from the Phoenix office. Someone who had laughed at her jokes. Someone who had said nothing when the storm hit. The message read, "You were wrong to trust him. But I was wrong not to speak up. I'm sorry." Samantha read it once. Then again. She let it sit open on her screen while she washed dishes. Brushed her hair. Turned off the lights. Then she came back, hovered over the delete button, and pressed it. Not because she was angry. Not because she hadn't wanted to hear it. But because she didn't need it. She was still standing. The next morning, she opened the cafe early. The sky was a pale lavender. The lake below reflecting the first hints of sun. She brewed the coffee, wiped the counters, tied her apron, and when the bell above the door rang and the first customer stepped inside, she smiled, not with performance, not with effort, but with something close to ease. Maybe she would always carry the scar. Maybe the internet would never forget. But she was no longer Samantha Lee. The scandal. She was Sarah Nolan, the woman who stayed. The one who got back up. And in that tiny cafe in nowhere, Utah. That was enough. It had to be. Blank, underscore, blank. Infidelity doesn't always start in the bedroom. Sometimes, it starts in the inbox. You can change your number. You can change your name. But trust, once broken, it leaves a scar under every password. Some betrayals go viral, but the silence afterward, that's the part that kills.